This was originally written in Spanish, and I remember this woman told me, "Hey, you got to read this guy, Guillermo Bonfil Batalla. He's writing kind of about what you're writing about." And I read it and said, "Yeah, it's very much in Mexico that he's writing. I mean, he's writing about Mexico, but he's basically writing about the falseness of this whole mestizo thing, the falseness of the way Mexican culture exists." And he's talking about the roots of who we are as indigenous people. I wouldn't say it's a really easy book to read, because he kind of assumes that you've done a lot of other reading. Actually, a lot of these books, they assume that you've done a lot of other reading. I'd say it's a difficult book to read, but it's well worth it. And then there's this book. It's called American Indian Contributions to the World. And this one works like an encyclopedia. You know, just pick a page. So when you hear us talking about the great contributions, the great accomplishments of our people when it comes down to astronomy, to medicine, calendar making, all these different things, you'll find most of them actually in here. And again, this is already becoming a dated book because there are a lot of things that are being better understood. Again, it's kind of like the concept of zero. They used to think that India originally had it before it's not really a Mayan invention. It probably was more realistically an Olmec invention. But right now the Mayans are giving the credit for it. And now it's India had it roughly about 600 AD, and we had it here in this roughly about, they're guessing between 40 BC, somewhere in that neighborhood. They're still not all that clear, since obviously they haven't digged up all the possibilities. There's this other book called Colonizer's Model of the World by James Blount. I'll summarize this book. Toward the end, he says, the Western Hemisphere was not conquered. He says, it was infected. And he basically goes through the book explaining how Europeans managed to get their hands on this whole continent and its resources and what they've done to our people on this continent. And he also wrote another book called Eight Eurocentric Historians. Right now, there's a guy named Jared Diamond who has been given so much credibility because he's required reading at universities, and nobody's questioning this guy. Jared Diamond is a very racist guy. If you know history. If you don't know too much about history, say, oh, that makes sense. Yeah, if you haven't read too much. He's got this, he did a PBS series called Guns, Germs, and Steel. And in this, how much time do I have, Scott?
Let's see, we're towards the end. Like maybe 5 more minutes?
Okay. In this video, he's got this thing about a sword. And he's going, oh, this sword, this is the secret of it. He's talking about the massacre in Cajamarca. In Cajamarca was the holy city, and that's where the Inca ran across the Spaniards. And they said, oh, well, yeah, let's talk. And they come into the city. The city was a sacred city, so therefore nobody was armed. So meanwhile, Jared Diamond is going on about how this sword is made, and he's telling you this was, what was the secret. And he says in Cajamarca, the soldiers were on a horse, and they could go to the left and they could cut, and they can go to the right and they can cut, and they go through and cut. But he doesn't tell you, which is very dishonest, it's criminal, is that none of the people on that day had any weapons. And that's why when they went and said, oh, they went all the way into the ruler of the Inca, and they killed every one of the warriors that was holding up the litter. And again, very dishonest and leaving out one key detail. The same thing with the massacre on the Feast of Huitzilopochtli. Leaving out one key detail, that none of those warriors that were killed that day had weapons. one key detail, not letting us know about, hey, smallpox, they used it in the Canary Islands. They used it over in Hawaii. When the same guy who wrote American Holocaust, David Stannard wrote a book called Before the Horror. And this is about Hawaii. We think of Hawaii, oh, it was a sparsely populated, it was a very populated bunch of islands at one point until the smallpox got there. And even in South Africa, that's how whites were able to move into South Africa so easily. Because again, the people of South Africa didn't have the immunity. So I'll move on, but this is the 8 Eurocentric historians. Oh, here we go. This is again, once you've read a little bit more of history, then you'll learn how to better question it. And the good part is, we got good European descent people like Blaud and Michael Coe and Jacques Soustelle, and these are people who are very moral and very honest about history, and they want the truth about history. So this is one of the ones that you should get to at one point. And then the rest of the books that I brought, again, which I'll leave them here. There are just new books, just so you'll know. There's something called The Allure of Nezahualcóyotl. There hasn't been a new book on Nezahualcóyotl in like 40 years. So this is one, but read it with caution, okay? Then they've printed up now Ballads of the Lords of New Spain, which is, again, kind of along side by side with Cantares Mexicanos. And then there's also this book, it's called Here in This Year, which is a Nahuatl text of Tlaxcala. Again, those of you who are studying the language and learning how to better understand the Nahuatl language. And I brought this one in. One of the identities that we promote as indigenous people is to use the term Nican Tlaca, we people here. We people here is literal, but it means us, the people of this land. And where we got this is years ago, this book by Lockhart, and he calls it We People Here. And he has a segment in it where he's quoting our people talking to the Spaniards, and says, and our people are saying, because we understood, even if you're from another city-state or whatever city-states, and talking to the Spaniards, we said, we the people here, we understood that we were the same people. And say, you the Castilians, and the dialogue went back and forth. And just again, for people who want to constantly focus on the divisions of our people understood that we were one people, even though we spoke different languages, we lived in different geographical areas, even though we had different personal histories, we understood that we were one people. So again, that's that one, and I brought a whole pile just for those who are studying Nahuatl. Okay, here's a nice pile of books. Okay, there is the foundation course in Nahuatl grammar, a nice little workbook. Isn't that intimidating? Again, you can get these off the internet. They are from the University of Montana. Why are the people in Montana so interested in, gee, why don't we have it at UCLA? Because something must be wrong. The best dictionary you can get yourself out there, if you can find it, it's called the Morphological Dictionary of Classical Nahuatl. Okay? And then there's Of the Manners of Speaking of the Old Ones, the Metaphors of Andrés de Olmos, the Tulal manuscript. This one's out of print, but you might get lucky. Just keep looking for it. The Nahuatl English Concordance for the Cantares Mexicanos, that's helpful. There is the Remy Simeón Diccionario de la Lengua Nahuatl o Mexicana. Again, this is something that you'll be able to find in Mexico. Although I did buy this in Huntington Park when there used to be a small Spanish language bookstore. So anyway, that's the introduction.